Okay, let's get started then. So thank you to everybody who's joined our webinar this afternoon, which is on diversity and inclusion. The webinar today is being hosted by Kevin Anang. He is one of our senior market underwriters in the legal indemnities team, and he's also the co-chair of our cultural awareness network. You are all in listen only mode at the moment, so you won't be able to come off mute or turn your cameras on, but I will change that at the end of the meeting if you want to come on camera, come off mute to ask Kevin any questions. In the meantime, please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. This webinar is being recorded today, so I'll send you a recording of the webinar after the session, along with a copy of the slides that Kevin's using. I'll also send a feedback survey, which would be really grateful if you could fill in, especially to let us know about other topics you'd like to hear about in future. And we really appreciate any other feedback on our webinars. So with that, I think we are good to go, and I'll hand over to Kevin.
Cheers for the introduction, Heidi, much appreciated. Yeah, and as Heidi mentioned, I am one of the underwriters within the business. I've been at Zurich now for about five years as of last week, and hopefully you'll find today's presentation interesting. Please feel free to post questions within the chat as we progress, but ultimately, hopefully, we can have quite a nice conversation towards the end of this. So ultimately, insofar as diversity and inclusion is concerned, you may see the acronym these days as DIB as opposed to D&I, and ultimately, the reason for that now is that a lot of people are focusing on the fact that it's more than just diversity and inclusion. It's now about it being equitable, so everybody feeling like they have a place at the table, and also ensuring that people feel like they belong. So ultimately, they feel like they belong where they work, and then they can bring their true selves to work. But I guess at the core of it, it's all about really creating a sustainable workforce, ensuring that we continue to have the skill sets within our organizations. We continue to have the diverse people from different backgrounds, different schools of thoughts, different experiences within our organizations to ensure that ultimately we build organizations which are forward looking, which know how to stay relevant, which know how to serve the customers who ultimately are the core of everything we do. And unless we do have a focus on DEIB, we don't have a focus on the customer, because ultimately the customers that we are serving and the landscape of our kind of population, etc., whether that be from a generational perspective, whether that be from a gender perspective, whether that be from a racial perspective, or any other characteristic, is changing and is evolving, and we have to evolve with it. So just a brief overview as to what D&I is, and ultimately it's the law. So as of 2010 and as of the Equality Act, it's been written into law, and ultimately it just focuses on the 9 protected characteristics, which are sex, age, race, sexual orientation, marital, civil, partnership status, pregnancy status, disability, gender reassignment, religion, or belief. But it really is wider than that. I think it focuses on diversity of thought, it focuses on neurodiversity, and it focuses on socioeconomic backgrounds. And ultimately, D&I applies to all of us. So we are all diverse, and we are in our own different ways. We all have our different outlooks. We all have our different perceptions. No two people are the same. And ultimately, I think what the solutions that we produce for our customers, and the ideas that we come up from, and the innovation that we and the creative ideas that we create, all arise from the fact that we all have different lenses, we all have different viewpoints, we all have different ways, etc., or we should do at least, in order to ensure that ultimately we can come up with solutions which aren't one dimensional, which don't just have one lens, which encompass a wide range of factors. And ultimately, that's the aim of D&I. The aim of D&I is to ensure that at any one table, we can consider a variety of different perspectives, of different backgrounds, of different cultures, of different religions, of different races, of different ages, of different genders, etc. Ultimately, it's ensuring that at the table where decisions are being made, we are thinking about as many different factors as possible to ensure that we can make decisions which will serve customers from a whole range of backgrounds, as well as serving employees from a whole range of backgrounds as well, so that people feel that they can be their true selves and bring their true selves to the workplace and beyond. So you might look at me now and say, okay, fine, good point, but, or maybe not a good point. And you think, okay, give me some statistics around why diversity inclusion is important. Well, I think the first and foremost, and when I focus on the sustainability perspective, is 42% of the UK workforce is over 50. With that projected to be 47% by 2030. And in 1992, the figure was 31%. So that's increased significantly. Yes, we are living longer. Yes, the average period of time that somebody will work over the course of their life is 47 years. But ultimately, we need to ensure that with that population of over 50s in the workplace increasing, we're also increasing the population of people coming into the organization at a younger age to ensure that we have sustainability and skill set, to ensure that we can continue serving our customers now and in the future, and that ultimately when people start retiring or start moving on, etc., those skills are easier to replace. I think we've seen it over COVID, and we've seen other elements that ultimately we do have an employee shortage, and that has led to all of us being challenged in a number of different ways, and challenges being placed on recruitment and remuneration, etc., etc. Some of which has been positive, but ultimately we need to ensure that now and in the future we have the skill sets to serve our customers, and we need to keep a lens on D&I in order to do so, to ensure that ultimately we are attracting a wide range of different people into our organizations who can pick up the skill sets and ensure that we continue to remain relevant over a longer period of time. In addition to that, other statistics are 47% of millennials are actively looking for diversity and inclusion when sizing up employees. So ultimately, that's a large population of the future generation of workers who are coming into workplaces with an eye on what us as companies are doing. And we need to make sure that ultimately we are serving their needs in order to ensure that we continue to attract top talent into the industry, and more generally to our respective organizations. In addition to that, 1 in 3 customers in the UK is disabled or close to someone who has a disability. So ultimately, if we don't have that lens, we are effectively ruling out 33% of the customer base, which is a significant amount and can have a big impact on revenue streams, reputation, and otherwise. So ultimately, we have to keep a lens on what's going on, and we have to ensure that we have diverse people coming into our organizations, so that ultimately we can keep a lens on this and ensure that we are acting in ways which cater to all customers, regardless of their individual circumstances. In addition to that, the money. Teams where men and women are equal earn 41% more revenue, and ultimately, again, another statistic is racially diverse teams are also more successful. So ultimately, you look at those two statistics and you think, oh, well, actually, from a revenue perspective, and for output and what we're producing for our shareholders, these teams which are more diverse produce more income, which doesn't hurt. And last but not least, closeted LGBTQ employees are 73% more likely to leave an organization than their peers due to the pressure of leading a double life. So ultimately, if we don't have diverse and inclusive workforces where people feel like they do belong, they have equity, and they have a seat at the table, we're potentially creating a toxic environment in which people don't feel like they can bring their true selves to work, and ultimately we can end up losing top talent, which we'd much rather preserve, and then have to go through the process of looking for that talent in the future, which sometimes can take quite a long period of time. And I think the key thing here to focus on is that there seems to be one key theme, and it all comes down to sustainability. It's all about sustainability. It's ensuring that our organizations are sustainable in that ensuring we retain talent, we look after talent. Talent feels like they belong within our organizations. Our talent is diverse enough to ensure that we have a lens on now and in the future, that we have a lens on a multitude of customers from a multitude of different backgrounds to ensure that our revenue streams are not affected now or in the future. And ultimately, if we don't have an eye on these matters, it will impact us. It will impact our ability to grow. It will impact our ability to attract talent. It will impact our ability to retain talent. And in the long term, it may actually impact the standing of our business. And none of us want that, which is why we keep such a key focus on matters pertaining to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So, what steps are Zurich Insurance UK taking to be fit for future? Um, for the future, I think from our first and foremost, I think what we recognise is that ultimately, yes, from a grassroots level, there's things to do, and yes, we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be slow paced, and it's going to take time because you're not just trying to win. Um, you're trying to win the hearts and minds, as well as it being ultimately, as well as outlining the business benefits here. Um, but we recognize that ultimately, if you're going to make the change, it's got to come from the top down. It's got to come from your leaders. They've got to lead the charge. And that is exactly what is happening at Zurich right now. So, insofar as our leaders are concerned, the commitments that they have made are they've committed to sponsoring um, our employee resource groups, and our employee resource groups, which there are five, focus on um, members of our employee group from underrepresented demographics. So, for instance, we have an employee resource group for LGBTQ plus matters, for disability matters, for age matters, for ethnicity matters, and for um, matters pertaining to women as well. And we'll go onto our employee resource group shortly. But their sponsorship of these, and these are the forefront of creating change within the organization to ensure that we do have sight of a changing landscape. We do have sight of the challenges of our respective employees. We do have a sight on the challenges of our customers more so. It's giving us that 360 lens to ensure that ultimately we are aware of exactly the tasks that or the measures that we can implement to ensure that we have a full complementary lens to the different characteristics within our society. Um, we sponsored the sponsorship of talent from underrepresented groups. So this is ensuring that it's not just a case of bringing in talent from underrepresented groups and allowing them to be at kind of the bottom parts of the organisation. It's sponsoring members from underrepresented groups who present talent or display talent to ensure that they progress throughout the organisation, to ensure that we have a diverse leadership base going forward as well, to ensure that actually the changes that we are making from a leadership perspective are trickling down, and ultimately it's not just one lens within our leadership community, it's multiple lenses to ensure that the changes we are making from a higher part of the organization are relevant to the entire workforce. We're measuring progress, and ultimately what we are doing is we're setting ourselves goals. So we're setting ourselves goals to have a certain amount of um, representation, leadership from women within our leadership team, from people from ethnic minorities within our leadership team, to ensure that ultimately we are measuring the progress that we are making in terms of being more inclusive from a disability perspective. We are measuring our progress. We are measuring to ensure that ultimately we are holding ourselves to accountable, and it's more than just talk. We are ensuring that we are at the forefront and we are leading by example in all matters pertaining to the EIB. Um, and lastly, there's reciprocal mentoring. So ultimately, we recognize that at certain points of our journey, we don't have the representation at senior levels. But ultimately, what we can do is ensure that they are being mentored by people from underrepresented groups. They are being mentored from people with different experiences to themselves to get an understanding of the differing lenses of different people within the organization, to ensure that actually they have an understanding as to what they could do better, or what they're not doing, or what they could be doing more of, to make this a truly inclusive and a truly diverse organization for all, and ultimately to ensure that the decisions that we are making are useful to our customers and will ensure that we are relevant for years and years to come. So we talk about the fact that we have a number of different employee resource groups. And I'm going to give you guys a brief overview of our employee resource groups now, and what they do. So we have 5. We have Zurich Pride UK, which focuses on the LGBTQ plus community. We have WIN, which is a Women's Innovation Network, which focuses on women. We have the Accessibility and Inclusion Network, which focuses on people who have disabilities. We have Next, which focuses on the next generation. We have Can, which focuses on people with different religious backgrounds or different ethnicity backgrounds. And we're currently in the process of looking at matters pertaining to socioeconomical upbringings, and also to do with the older generation and navigating the workplace once you reach a certain age. So first up, the Accessibility and Inclusion Network. So this network pertains to disability and has about 120 network members. We have an internal kind of workplace Facebook page, which is our kind of internal Zurich workplace, where they have 184 members. They have 10 different work streams. So effectively, this is 10 different streams of work that they are working on at present to kind of push change forward. And last but not least, they have 106 mental health first aiders. So ultimately, they're ensuring that we're putting well-being at the forefront of what we do, and that we are supporting employees from a range of different backgrounds, whether that be matters relating to a physical or mental matter, to ensure that actually they're covered throughout. And some of the progress and achievements that they've had over the last year or so, they've refreshed training for all employees within, they've collaborated with external networks, they've contributed towards the creation of a diversity and inclusion guide to further help colleagues improve their knowledge of matters pertaining to D&I. They've launched a mental health policy to ensure that ultimately people have the resources should they be having well-being challenges. They've collaborated with other network groups to ensure that ultimately we're paying an eye, we're keeping an eye to intersectionality, and the fact that ultimately, in a lot of these instances, given the characteristics that we are concerned with, it's not just siloed to one group or another, that ultimately you can be one person who has a range of different matters that ultimately harm their progression or harm their day-to-day career, which is intersectional, and they're focusing on that. And last but not least, they've partnered with multiple charity partners as well, to ensure that ultimately it's not just an internal lens we have, it's also an external lens where we're helping the wider community and, by product, our customers. Um, then we have the Women's Innovation Network. So the Women's Innovation Network focusing on the challenges that face women in the workplace, whether that be matters pertaining to bias, whether that be matters pertaining to imposter syndrome, whether that be matters pertaining to menopause, as per our recent menopause policy, whether that be matters pertaining to maternity leave, etc. They represent the voice of women within the organization, to ensure that ultimately we have a lens on the challenges that women face on a day-to-day basis, which would impact their ability to progress within the ladder at Zurich, or ability to feel like they belong or feel that they are supported within the organization. The Women's Innovation Network is the voice of women within our organization. Then you have Zurich Pride UK, and this focuses on the LGBTQ plus community. And ultimately, they focus on a lot of things, such as building our partnership with Stonewall. Um, they've won a number of awards for the work they've done in the community with our trans and bi populations. They've launched our Transitioning at Work guidance to ensure that where employees are looking to transition, they are adequately supported. And there's been a lot of restructure within that, but ultimately, even with the restructure, there's still kept on going. And ultimately, that's it. It's more than just the effort of one or two people. This is a mass effort by a number of different people, where we have large communities within the organization who are working together to push us towards a part where we are ultimately ensuring that the voices of LGBTQ plus people within the organization are heard. Um, and ultimately, they play a massive part, and they roll out loads of training to employees to ensure that we are ahead of the game when it comes to our inclusivity, our awareness of what language is inclusive, and our awareness of matters pertaining to the LGBTQ plus community. And lastly, um, in terms of our networks today, we'll focus on the Cultural Awareness Network, for which I am co-chair. And ultimately, what we're doing is building a better lens of where we sit. How represented are we compared to the population? How represented are we compared to the working age population? What steps are we taking as an organization to ensure that we have true equality amongst our employee base, regardless of backgrounds? What are we taking to ensure that everybody has the same experiences within the organization? And we've launched such networks, such as our Inclusion Ally network, to ensure that where people do suffer any form of discrimination for any characteristic whatsoever, um, regardless of who they are, regardless of what their background is, that they have an ally within the organization who they can talk to understand what steps they can take next, and ensure that ultimately they also feel like they have a voice within the organization, regardless of the background. But I think more than that, another thing we've done is ensure that we shared experiences and learnings from employees in times gone by, to ensure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, so that when we do have employees come into the organization from different backgrounds, they also feel as welcome and included as others around the table. So that I focused on a number our ERGs. I focused on some of the stuff we do, but in terms of DEIB, how do we empower our people to grow and succeed? And how can you empower your people to grow and succeed? So one of the things we do when it comes to diversity is we focus on the numbers. Pure, plain and simple. We focus on the numbers. We focus on the numbers of people we have from different backgrounds within our organization, and we really focus on this to ensure that we are well represented. And it encourages a mix of people that reflects our customers and the world we live in, to ensure that ultimately we are reacting and responding to our customer base. So we look at how many diverse employees do we have? How many did we lose this year? How many did we hire this year? How many did we lose this year? Okay, what practices are we taking to ensure that we are retaining talents? Where are we looking for talent? Where are we recruiting from? Are we doing enough? Could we do more? Are we working with the right networks, etc., etc., etc.? We look at where we are and we compare it on a year by year basis to ensure that where we do see numbers trending in a downwards direction, we are on top of it and react to it accordingly. From an inclusion perspective, we focus on behaviours. So we create an environment where our people feel welcomed, supported, respected, and valued. We do this by ensuring that ultimately they feel safe to speak up. Ultimately, the people around them are trained adequately and supported adequately to hire talent, to communicate with talent, to look after the talent, to ensure that they're more than happy and willing to take feedback on board. That's what we do. We mentor people with high potential to ensure that ultimately, whatever the case is, they will progress regardless of their backgrounds. And ultimately, we use the feedback that we get from our employees and react accordingly to ensure that ultimately we are always on top of everything that we do to ensure that it is an inclusive environment for all. And then from an equity perspective, we focus on systems and processes with the notion of having fair and impartial opportunities within Zurich. Ultimately, from an equity perspective, all we're trying to ensure is that everything that we do, regardless of anything, is fair. There's no picking of any particular group. We're not going out there and saying, oh, we're looking for one particular group or we're looking for another particular group. No, all we're looking to do is to ensure that we are opening the doors to everybody so that everybody feels like they have a seat here, the systems are fair, and regardless, there's an equal baseline for everyone. And ultimately, the truth is, in life, we don't start equal. If you look from a socioeconomic perspective, there will be people who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds who have had different challenges, and they're not equal, and ultimately different exposure, etc. So it's not an equal footing. But what we are trying to do is put the systems and processes in place to ensure that it's as equal as it possibly can be, appreciating that at times life isn't always fair for everybody, and there will be different experiences and different backgrounds, which means that people don't have what don't have the exposure, the experience, etc. And we're just trying to build that. And lastly, we're dealing with belonging, and just ensuring that people belong, and feel like they belong, and monitoring and listening to our employees and taking that feedback on board to ensure that they feel like they belong within the organization. And one of the measures that we've put in place in order to get us to a point where we feel like ultimately we are unlocking the door for our communities, we are trying to create an equal baseline, is through something we call Kickstart Mentors UK. And ultimately, what we're doing here is literally opening the door to communities that we serve where we haven't historically recruited from, which are often, because of where our offices are based, offer inner city schools based around their office with lower socioeconomic um, pupils within. And what we're doing is we're going out to schools and we're saying we want to ensure that our future generation of leaders has an inclusive lens, has an idea of the different backgrounds and different experiences people from, I guess, lower socioeconomic backgrounds or from a number of multiples of underrepresented groups have. And what we would like to do is get ourselves into a position where our leaders understand the challenges that different people from different backgrounds face, but as well as that, that we are opening the eyes and the door for people from these schools, for people from a close distance to our offices, so that ultimately they feel like our organization has a place for them, and that they are empowered to take the opportunities or take on, or try to utilize the opportunities that we have, and make an application. So what we're doing here is effectively using our Zurich network to connect ourselves with schools within a local distance of us. And then we are basically mentoring pupils within those schools, um, giving our leadership or our future leaders or our leaders of tomorrow the development to kind of understand a different lens, a different group of people, different backgrounds, giving them coaching and mentoring skills as well, which are not always easy to kind of develop on the job. Um, and thereafter, giving these pupils who are mentored work experience within the organization. So I think from my perspective, what I will say here is there's a lot of stuff we do, but we are nothing without our network, and we are nothing without our partners such as yourselves. And there's a number of things that we do, but ultimately we all have the same challenges. We all want to be relevant within the next 20 to 25 years or more. We all want our companies to still be here. We all want to be sustainable, and we all want to have the skills within our organizations to ensure that we are still relevant. And there are ways that we can work together to build that. And I think if any of what you've um, heard from today's presentation is interesting, please do get in touch, because I think there are ways that we can combine together. Ultimately, there's only a finite amount of resource at Zurich. If you would like access to schools for mentoring, if because you want to mentor their staff, if you want to have access to Zurich for whatever it is in terms of a kind of D&I lens or whatever, we can share our resources and we can work together to ultimately make our entire industry a more inclusive place for all. I'm now happy to take as many questions as you may have.
Thank you, Kevin. That was really, really interesting. I'm just going to change the settings so that people can come off mute if they would like to. But in the meantime, please feel free to put any questions you've got into the chat. I'm sure you'd be happy to follow up with anyone individually, Kevin. I appreciate it might not be the easiest topic for people to always ask questions on. We've got a question from Joe. How is it easiest to start monitoring this stuff?
Um, I think it's just a case of understanding like getting a baseline position. I think from a staffing perspective, we all know where we are and like how many employees we have. Sorry. So I think what we started doing is collecting data from employees and kind of engaging with our employee base and saying, oh, ultimate and yeah, and engaging with our employee base to try and start collecting the data from them to get an understanding of where we stand from a demographic perspective, where we stand in terms of our male to female representation or our ethnicity representation or our LGBT representation. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to get data from employees within. I guess the only challenge is that when you are collecting quite sensitive data, people want to get the ability to people want the ability to keep it, I guess, private and confidential. And I guess it's just creating a safe space for them to do so. That's what I started doing and asking the questions at high stage, but finding it difficult. And Joe, yeah, I think that's the same challenge we're all having. We're having difficulties in collecting the data from internal employees as well. And I think ultimately what all we've done as a result is a couple of call to actions. Is from our perspective, we have a kind of internal kind of data system called GEMS where employees put their data, and we just ask people if they could kind of refresh their data on an ongoing basis and just explain to them why we wanted the data. But ultimately, it's really hard to kind of get people to pick up that data. So all we've tried to do is get people to provide that data. So all we've tried to do is explain to them the reasons we need the data, explain to them that there's only one or two people within the entire organization, which is an organization of 5,000 odd people who can see the data, and try and get them to a place where they're comfortable knowing that ultimately we're asking for this data to create a better working environment for you all. And ultimately, this data won't have any bearing on you or how you progress or anything. It's just a case of collecting this to help us be a better employer for you all, and only one or two people have access for it. And we're starting to see some progress in that. But I think the one lesson we've learned is that we have to be very, very kind of clear in our communication to employees, but also listen to them and kind of get an understanding of why they wouldn't want to provide the data, so that ultimately we can work to get to a point where they do feel more comfortable in providing it. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Kevin. Got any other questions? Yeah, as I was saying, I'm more than happy for anyone to get in touch with myself or Kevin if you've got any further questions on what we've talked about today and the various things that Zurich are doing. As I mentioned, I'll send out a recording of this webinar, so feel free to share that with anyone else within your organisations that may be interested in hearing about what we've talked about today as well. I'll aim to send that out hopefully tomorrow. We'll get it uploaded to our YouTube page. It doesn't look like we've got any other questions coming through to the chat, so I think we will probably close the webinar there. Massive thanks to Kevin for his presentation today. Really, really interesting, and I hope you found it interesting and useful to hear a bit more about what diversity, inclusion, equity and belonging means and what we're doing at Zurich. And as I've mentioned, any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Cheers.